Reddit. What's your family's dark secret? NSFW. My uncle was investigated for the Green River killings. Years later he was investigated for the Spokane prostitute murders. He was good friends with Yates, who was found guilty, and his saliva was found on a beer can near a dumping site. When I was a little girl, my mom told me to never get in his car if he tried to pick me up. Funny enough, he sells life insurance. My great aunt had a second child and gave it up for adoption because she was a newly single woman and didn't think she could provide for both kids. This apparently caused a lot of drama in our family back in the 70s and people stopped talking to each other over it. My generation never heard a single word of any of this. Then, one day, my mom calls me to tell me about my new cousin. I was baffled and figured someone had a kid. Nope. That little girl that was given up for adoption was now in her 40s and hired a private investigator to find her biological family. She's since been assimilated into the family and I see her regularly at family events. My great-grandfather was a Christian Scientist minister. They believe that the mind can cure the body, and he told the family of a girl with diabetes, a treatable disease, to pray the sickness away. The girl soon died and the girl's father held my great-grandfather in a murderous rage. My grandparents swapped spouses. My grandmother on my mother's side had an affair with my grandfather on my father's side. Everyone got divorced and then my grandfather on my mother's side fell in love and married my grandmother on my father's side. Family reunions were fun. My head hurts thinking of the potential drama complications this has caused. A super distant uncle in my family used to get in a lot of trouble with cops. My nan and great aunt used to hide him, once hiding him in a freezer while cops searched the house. One day he ended up kidnapping an ambassador. Successfully ransomed him off. Tried escaping the country via boat but the captain realized he was a crook and tried to take him to the cops. Distant uncle instead holds captain at gunpoint and dives off the boat several kilometers offland. Police never found him and assumed he drowned. Decades later my nan got a letter from him, confirming to all of us he was alive and well. My mom was raped when she was 14. Her dad, my granddad, tracked the guy down and shot him dead in a bar. Where's grandpa now? I don't know how long specifically he spent in jail, but he had a fairly high rank in the military. Either he or someone else pulled some strings to get a fairly short sentence. He's passed now but he was always a good man. My grandfather died in 1946. Before my dad was even born. We were always told he drove his truck into a ditch while drunk, fell asleep, and asphyxiated when the tailpipe got clogged with mud. He was in his early 30s at the time. Well, I got into genealogy a couple of years back and found a bunch of records and newspaper articles about the incident. Turns out grandpa wasn't alone in the truck. He was with an underage girl, less than half his age, who also died alongside him. Obviously, this was not my grandmother. The newspapers didn't say it explicitly, but there was heavy insinuation that there was some side of the road romance happening when the fumes apparently overtook both of them. I still haven't told my dad what I found. Not sure I ever will. My grandfather went away to fight in Vietnam and when he came back my grandma was pregnant with my mom. We never knew who her real dad was. Damn. I can never help feeling sorry for vets that have to deal with that. Whatever happened between your grandmother and grandfather after that? They stayed together for a number of years until my mom was around 10, then they finally divorced. As far as I know they have nothing to do with one another. My granddad was into dating students before it became something people lost their job over. That's how our family got started. He taught, then gave extra credit to my grandmother. My great-grandmother was married to her first husband, an Italian mobster in New York, in the early 1920s. They had 4 kids. In 1928, 6 years after they were married, she disappeared and no one in the family knew what happened to her. They all quietly assumed her husband had her killed, as it was known he was very abusive to her. Nope. She ran off with my great-grandfather. They moved to Philadelphia and had changed their last names. They were always very secretive about their past. No one knew the original family names or where they had come from. Until I took a DNA test and matched with a third cousin that was descended from her first set of children. Her original 4 children were sent to orphanages because her first husband couldn't take care of them. It was a big surprise for both families and some very hurt feelings for the children she had abandoned. They are in their 90s, but it affected them their entire lives. I don't really think that this is a dark secret, but it's something that I didn't find out until I was an adult. Which was mostly because my grandma doesn't like talking about it. So I think it counts. When I was going through some old stuff of my grandma's after the death of my mother, I found some old photographs of a baby, not my mom because my mom had dark, almost black hair at birth and this baby was blonde, and a birth certificate for someone named Francesco, mom's maiden name. I asked my grandma about it and at first she didn't really want to tell me. But I gave her some space and she must have decided that I deserved to know. Or maybe she was just tired of having the secret. Because she eventually told me. Francesco, who they called Frank, was my grandma's son. He was my mom's younger brother by a couple of years. Apparently, when Frank was 3, my grandma's ex-husband kidnapped him and my grandma never saw him again. My grandma's ex-husband, my grandfather, although I don't consider him such, the least reason for which is because I never met him, was involved with the mob bandits suspected that he took Frank with him back to Sicily. But nobody is really sure. My grandma is pretty sure that he would have taken my mom too. If my mom hadn't been sick and in the hospital due to tonsillitis at the time. It's kind of given me an idea of why that side of my family can be kind of withholding about things. I didn't know my mom had been married before my dad until I was a teenager, but it also makes me feel really sorry for my grandma. As far as I know, only my mother and I, possibly my stepfather but I'm not sure, know that my real father wasn't some guy my mom dated in college but a stranger who grabbed her and assaulted her. I didn't even know this until she told me when I was a teenager. On my father's side, my grandfather and my father are both guilty of incest rape. My father is the only one who has been found out though. He took a deal to register as a sex offender. Only because my little brother and sister were about to testify about what he did to them. The family still defended him. Their precious boy. And they shunned my aunt for believing her own daughter when she outcried that he had raped her. I of course do not keep in touch. But he is now with a woman who's completely brainwashed that he is innocent. With a young 6/7-year-old daughter. Poor child. My mom's parents were uncle and niece. Her dad married his brother's daughter. Their family was on the East Coast and they ran away together to California. They had 2 kids. My mom and her older brother. All of us are a product of incest. My grandmother had an affair with my aunt's high school boyfriend's father. It became very awkward when my aunt married said boyfriend and had a kid with him. Why? Because my grandmother married said boyfriend's father. My aunt now has a kid with her stepbrother. That's oddly hilarious actually. My dad is abusive and keeps my mother in debt so she can't take us and leave. We look like a perfect middle class family from the outside but boy is it shit on the inside. My dad's family is messed up. His cousin told her husband that if he didn't stop smoking she'd divorce him. So instead of quitting he lied about having cancer. When he went to the hospital he told her he was getting treatment but instead smoked at the hospital. This all happened before I was born but yeah her husband lied about having cancer for almost a decade. My dad is the only normal one in the family. My family was smuggling diamonds in the Apeldoorn area of the Netherlands from the late 1800s up until WW2. They got pretty rich off it too until the Nazis invaded and took most of them into concentration camps. My great-grandfather, while on the trains to a camp, convinced himself and several others to jump from the trains. As they did they were gunned down by Nazi soldiers and my great-grandfather was one of the only survivors. grandparents on my stepmother's side paid a hitman to take out my father. Luckily the guy had morals. He met my father and after talking to him a bit ended up telling him what he was originally there for and that he was going to return the money. My great-great-grandma went out to dinner with her husband one night. Her husband thought she was looking at other guys and brought her to a hotel room nearby and slit her throat. He left her to die but she survived and then escaped and left him. We didn't find this out until a few years ago through an old newspaper. My grandfather broke it off with his first wife because she got knocked up by my grandfather's brother, who was his also married, while my grandfather was deployed during the Malayan emergency. He had stress and anxiety issues the entire time I knew him and I know it cost a part of himself to forgive his brother to keep the family together. The worst part? She named the kid after my grandfather. Tried to pass him off as a junior. The kid is now in his 50s and is in prison. Selling prison art. Me. So my biological father had me out of wedlock. No one in his family knows about me, that I know of. I've never met any of them. And the last time I talked to him he asked me to stay away because it would ruin his marriage reputation. Honestly, I don't care that much. I didn't meet him until I was like 23, so by that point it's not like anything had really changed in my life other than another blip in my life. I've got way worse stories and issues going on, so it's a fairly minor blip at that. I've actually got a sister and niece that I've never met but I've internet stalked a couple of times. I sent her $50 anonymously through GoFundMe a while back. But I doubt I'll ever contact her. There's no way I'd ever send a "Hey, it's me, your brother." I don't know if our dad ever mentioned it, but he knocked up my mom about 30 years ago. My great-grandmother supposedly summoned the devil to have my great-grandfather murdered. It's an old urban legend. But if you met her, it might not seem far off considering she's quite the strange old woman and has a voice like that of that little midget lady from Poltergeist but in Spanish. My mother is light-skinned because my grandma was raped by a white man. I found out at my grandma's wake. We had always been told we were part Native American. I've been waiting for this thread cause I just found this out over Christmas. Dad's ex-wife had 2 kids from her previous marriage. One of them, the younger one, was born deaf because her ex-husband shoved her down the stairs during pregnancy. Came to find out that he did not do that. He was the nicest man ever. She lied because the deaf kid is actually her cousin's. She ducked her cousin when he was staying at their house for a bit and had an inbred kid with health defects. She hid this from her husband. This all came to light when the older brother, born from her husband, no health defects, told his dad that he accidentally walked in on mom banging the cousin. Dad got a paternity test. Confirmed it. Deaf brother still doesn't know. Praying no one buys him a 23andMe for Christmas ever. That one cousin isn't actually your cousin. Your aunt was pregnant by another man and your uncle knew. And married your aunt anyway so her family wouldn't disown her. She looks like a thumb and is dumber than a bag of hammers. My great-grandma claimed for a long while that she was a virgin, which was why she adopted my grandmother, but I later found out that she had multiple miscarriages. IDK if that qualifies as dark, but it's definitely sad. Rip great-grandma. My great-great-grandfather once got into a fight at a bar over a woman and murdered a man and said fight. It being the late 1800s. He moved a couple states south and changed his surname. Which is how a family of European Spanish mutts ended up with a Scottish surname. My mother is batshit crazy. Her sisters know but just go on as if she doesn't really exist. None of us see her. She sometimes calls her younger sister to whine about her boyfriend. She'll be 77 soon. The guy's 50. They all ignored the fact that I was being severely neglected. That she was going through boyfriends at a rapid rate. Every single one was an alcoholic addict and abusive as hell. I once asked my aunt through email if they had ever tried to do anything. Did anybody call social services? Or even talk about doing it? She emailed back, "I wish you luck in your search." Supposedly my great-grandfather deserted his post on a ship with another guy in Washington. He was in the Spanish-American War and was fed up with the rations. They jumped over and swam to shore, and when they got to shore and were deciding what to do, the boiler blew. He claimed to have not been responsible for the boiler. Then he stole a bicycle and biked back east. I think this is all a tall tale. I tried looking it up and verifying it and didn't really come up with anything credible. My mother was a groupie for Creedence Clearwater. There's 5 kids in my family and none of know who my older sister's biological father is. We all like to speculate about it except for my mother and older sister. My parents had a kid outside of wedlock and then put him up for adoption. This might not seem super dark, but to a Christian 15-year-old boy it shattered my reality. I think about him almost every day, knowing that I have a brother out there that I've never and might never meet.